Student feedback in the classroom, an action research overview. As educators, we fully understand the crucial element of feedback in our profession. Administrators give feedback to teachers after observations and evaluations. We receive feedback from one another when we collaborate and brainstorm with our colleagues. And of course, at the district and state level, our leaders give us feedback on school protocol, benchmarks, and state assessments. With all of the feedback being given to educators, we're getting a lot from one another. But it begs the question, how often are we relying on feedback from our students? For this action research, I identified the problem that teachers need to solicit student feedback more regularly and use that feedback to inform instruction. So again, how often are we really relying on feedback from those we teach? Education, after all, is for them. One of the most vital elements of being an intentional educator is the willingness to rely on consistent, timely feedback to inform our instruction and best practices, both the feedback we give and the feedback we get. The guiding questions are as follows. To what extent are teachers regularly soliciting student feedback, and how does regular student feedback inform best practices and augment classroom culture and teacher-student rapport? Before we look at my data, we need to uncover what the evidence is showing us. Two popular mediums to ask students for feedback are exit tickets and surveys, whether they are formal or informal, anonymous, or with students identified. These methods are invaluable and can provide immediate feedback to inform future instruction. Studies are clear. Exit tickets and surveys are excellent methods to gauge student perceptions about many elements of teaching. According to Marzano, exit slips are easy to use and take little time away from instruction. Many teachers use them routinely, even daily, and attest to their positive influence on student achievement. Additionally, in a 2015 Edutopia article, a good exit ticket can tell whether students have a superficial or in-depth understanding of the material. Teachers can then use this data for adapting instruction to meet students' needs the very next day. And according to Emelina Monero, a student survey allows students to voice their issues, needs, and desires, giving feedback on how a teacher can change his or her instruction to help them perform better in class. Before this project, what my teacher intuition told me was that not enough teachers are using feedback regularly from students in their classrooms. But I didn't know how to prove this. I needed help. I reached out to another colleague. Dr. Bob Diepenbrock has been in education for more than 40 years and has been in roles from a high school principal to a superintendent. And he offered the following insight. Teachers either do not know how to use student feedback to inform instruction, they are not familiar with the feedback methods available to them, they feel as though they are limited on time, or a combination of any of those. But if education is for our students, why are their voices not being heard as they should be? In full disclosure, my data is not quite complete. I have 3 full weeks of data, and I'll have 1 set of data to be collected at the end of this week, which I will then add to the project. As such, I will talk about emerging trends and data that I have collected thus far. The objectives of my action research are as follows. Collect biweekly and weekly data, use exit tickets for biweekly feedback, use a formal survey on Fridays, and then use student feedback to inform daily instruction, that's the exit tickets, and then plan for long-term success using the weekly surveys. I asked 26 advanced placement language and composition juniors to participate in this study, and they were actually kind of excited. The time frame was 4 weeks from the end of January to this Friday, February 26th, 2021. I provided note cards and sticky notes for students to use for the exit tickets, and then Google Forms for weekly surveys. Students completed the weekly surveys on their Chromebooks. The biweekly exit tickets were chosen out of a pool of questions. 2 questions twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I selected the questions randomly and kept changing it every week, every other week, to make sure that the questions were fresh and that they didn't stagnate and students didn't know what to expect, as I didn't want them to be apathetic and consider the exit ticket a checklist item. This got me the most authentic feedback from the students. These questions on the exit tickets were also open-ended. No yes or no questions were asked. With the weekly survey, I asked the same 5 questions every week. The only difference was a modification of the description of that current week's lessons. The statements were given on a linear ranking system, from 1 being not at all to 5 being very much so, and students' responses were anonymous. For the exit tickets, I chose every week, twice a week, from a pool of 6. And I kept the questions revolving to keep it fresh. I also wanted students to think very critically about their responses before turning them in. I gave them 5 minutes twice a week at the end of class to complete these. With the weekly survey, question number 4 was where I changed the wording and described what we had done in class that week and the skills and concepts we had focused on, so that students could reflect and recall what we had done. Oh yes, we did this week. Here's how I felt about that. The other questions remained the same. From my data, I noticed that with the biweekly exit tickets, students became more and more comfortable sharing their feedback and telling me what I could do to improve instruction. This qualitative data suggested a significant jump in more detailed student feedback between weeks 1 and 2. My prediction is that students will continue to provide detailed feedback on weekly open-ended questions, and instruction will be adjusted at least twice a week. With the weekly surveys, the quantitative data showed students growing in their comfort levels regarding classroom culture, teacher-student rapport, and engaging lessons. The data also indicated students are more pleased with the timeliness of teacher feedback. As with any study, this one has its limitations. The 2 that I felt were most pronounced were: 1, a small sample size, as I only had 26 students polled, and I know that a larger sample size would yield more student feedback and allow for more differentiation based on more comprehensive data. Additionally, I had a handful of absences every week, and those students, although they had the option to take the surveys, they were not required to do so. But I still know that the data that I was able to collect is still viable to help me refine best practices. My conclusions were wonderful. The more feedback I solicited, the more comfortable students became with giving me feedback. They almost came to look forward to it, and I looked forward to getting it from them because it's helping me grow. This natural progression allowed for a blossoming of stronger student-teacher rapport. Secondly, my empathy and my understanding of students' perceptions of my classes rose every week. I learned a little bit more with every passing week of this study. And I know that teacher-student rapport is critical to everyone's success. And lastly, students' understanding of skills and concepts was augmented as lessons were adjusted and modified. Student feedback data is a powerful springboard for differentiation. As a future administrator, I know the implications are weighty, and I have a responsibility to my future staff and students to make sure that I understand these and can actually do something with this information. I know that one teacher and a sample size as small as what I had, even with a repeated feedback loop, is not sufficient. I need more teachers doing this. I know that larger sample sizes are needed for more accurate data. I believe PLCs should consider content-specific exit tickets and surveys. I believe that administrators should provide targeted professional development regarding student feedback. And lastly, I think teachers need to consider the technology that's available for quicker feedback results. Not that there's anything wrong with a note card. A final thought on this action research. The most basic of all human needs is the need to understand and be understood. The best way to understand people is to listen to them. We have to listen to our students. They're the reason we got into this in the first place. So students, this is for you.